The next session is Understanding Neurodiversity in Women. Our panel will share their expertise and lived experiences on how we can support neurodivergent women in the workplace with actionable strategies to create truly neuro-inclusive environments. To chair this panel, we have Iveta, CEO of Happy Autistic Lady and National Neurodiversity Training, and joining her is Dr. Tina Baker from the University of York. Ayo Sokale, BBC television producer and CEO of Get Coached, and Faria Arsh from the Autism Foundation, and Lucy Wilson from Mindshift Empowerment. Can you please welcome our guests to the stage?
Hi everyone, lovely to meet you all. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Iveta, I'm the CEO of Happy Autistic Lady and National Neurodiversity Training. And today we're going to be talking about neurodiversity and neurodivergent women, their strengths, some of the challenges they might experience in the workplace, and how you and your organisation can support them and the benefits that brings to you. Now, neurodiversity, in case you don't know, neurodiversity is a way to describe that there's no one correct way of thinking, being or processing information. And together as a group here, we're comprised of people who are neurodivergent, so those who might be autistic, dyslexic, ADHDers, the list goes on, or those who might be neurotypical. And I'm joined by a fantastic panel and can't wait to share everything with you. So, please, Ayo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. So my name's Sokale. So I'm a chartered civil engineer by background. I'm a BBC presenter. So if you have any young people in your life, you may have seen me on Saturday and Sunday on Get Set Galactic. I'm also CEO of AI-powered coaching app called Get Coach. So you can get those if you want. Look, there's that really obvious plug. And I'm a former councillor and deputy mayor of Reading. So over to you.
Hi, my name's Tina Baker. I'm a lecturer at the University of York, and my specialism is neurodiversity, inclusivity and accessibility. And I work a lot with families in the community whose children are fighting for diagnosis and support from the local schools.
Hi everyone, this is Faria Arsh. I am the founder and CEO of Autism Foundation. That started with the success of my book that's based on my daughter's real life story. My daughter Afia, she's got autism, ADHD, severe learning needs, and I created a method to toilet train her, and that led to the formation of Autism Foundation. So now I support parents, carers and organizations to understand autism better, and I also help everybody to toilet train their disabled children.
Hello everyone, I'm Lucy Wilson. I'm the founder of Mindshift Empowerment. I have worked across retail, finance, tech, and a number of other kind of areas, and I am an autistic, ADHD, dyslexic woman, and I have seen the struggles firsthand of working in an environment that isn't set up for neurodivergent individuals. I chaired a inclusion and disability community where I helped the company led on inclusion best practices, including like hiring. And I now run my own company, which offers training and consulting to help organisations be the best that they can in the neuro-inclusion space.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Very briefly before we go into the questions, it's important to know why it's actually relevant for you to learn about neurodiversity. Outside of, of course, the ethical and the legal obligations that organisations have and the fact that diversity benefits us all, there are also impacts on retention rates, satisfaction, well-being and brand reputation. So if you are working in a company, 15% of the population is neurodivergent, so you likely have neurodivergent staff, and 50% of neurodivergent employees are actively thinking of leaving their employer because of a lack of support. And if 50% of neurodivergent employees left their employer across the UK, it would amount to about 25 billion in turnover costs, and up to 8,000 autistic students drop out of higher education every year, which results in 73 million lost tuition. So if you're in education or organisation, this is definitely something to take on. So now onto the panel. What strengths do neurodivergent women bring to the workforce?
So for me, I feel like we are able to kind of harness so much and bring adaptability into the workforce, so that we have always, like for me as a dyslexic person, I've had to rewrite comms because I can't spell one word. So we have to bring that adaptability into everything we do. So I feel like you get a lot for that. And you also get, in my opinion, kind of a bit more than one person if you can build and work to people's strengths. Because again, I've always done my day job, and then I've had a bit of a side hustle on the side where I've done looking after ERGs or well-being within a community, and you kind of get a bit of extra if you can support that person and be more than, give them more than they need to, if you say.
Definitely. Anyone?
Well, personally, I think that we bring more to the table, not less. So timekeeping, the ability to adhere to deadlines, because you can't not. I'm neurodiverse, so I know the pressure of people trying to prevent you to adhere to a deadline. Finishing work to the nth degree of detail is another one. We bring conscientiousness to the role. We may not be the most sociable people, but we work really hard and we have to see things through. We can't leave it. If we know there's a task that needs doing by the end of the week, it'll be done on Monday morning. So...
Yeah, I love that. So I'm autistic, ADHD and dyslexic, and I'm an engineer by background. And that's a space where I think there is such a need for more autistic people, and autistic women specifically, because we're pattern spotters. That's what the research says. We kind of look at a system, we understand the challenges within it, and we innovate and solve problems. And obviously that's really important in the world we're living today. And I can see that in my career from, you know, the number of projects that have been delivered that reduce the risk of flooding to communities. So if you're an engineer, a civil engineer, software engineer, all these kind of STEM spaces, I think it's almost critical that we have these kind of minds. They almost feel necessary. That should be the prerequisite, not to be extreme.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. I definitely agree with Ayo. There's a big overlap between neurodiversity and STEM, as you said. I believe about 30% of engineers in the UK are dyslexic. So you'll make some great points. And what are some of the biggest challenges neurodivergent women face at work?
Well, when we talk about neurodiversity, some people may struggle with communication, and that's what I teach in most of my training is we need to give these neurodiverse women a voice to speak what they need, because unless they're able to articulate their needs and wants, the organizations cannot help them and support them in the best way. But that's the problem that we have generally is they're not able to articulate it, and the organizations do not support them. And that's the change we really need to make, because it can only come with awareness. The more awareness we raise about neurodiversity, and especially within women, because women are really good at masking it. They mask it, but it takes a huge toll on their mental and emotional health. And that's when they try and leave work. And that's what we need to stop happening. So we need to encourage them to not mask it, and we need to support them. We first of all need to ask them what exactly they want, because by giving them the voice, we are giving them the choice of putting things in place which are going to be supportive for them.
So I think, lack of support is a major thing. Communication is also really important for me. Things like saying end of day. I have no idea what end of day is. That is not a time. You need to be giving me something specific. So when you're communicating things, I mean what I say and I say what I mean, and I need you to mean what you say and say what you mean. So if you're telling me a time that things need to be done by, that communication needs to be really important. And giving me the why as well, that's a really important thing to be doing when you're communicating things. So the when needs to be specific. 5 o'clock on Friday. Don't do 5 o'clock on Friday, actually. No, that's a terrible time. But maybe a specific time on a specific day, that is helpful. But if you are kind of giving me a kind of wide framework of end of day, that could be, do you need to pass that on to someone else before you finish work? And my brain then goes into this overthinking, over-processing area where you're more conscious about the time that it needs to be completed rather than actually doing the work that needs to be done.
Definitely. I think you're spot on, especially with the metaphors. Very common in corporate language, things like circle back to things.
Yeah.
Me as well, being autistic and literal thinker, if you say circle back, you'll imagine doing a little circle like a dog. It doesn't make sense.
And acronyms as well. Like, acronyms are the bane of my life, because then I'm thinking about what does that acronym mean? I'm Googling it, and then you've lost my train of thought, and I'm distracted by Google.
Exactly. So how does this lack of support impact neurodivergent women?
So we're currently facing a stress epidemic in the UK in general. So basically 1 in 5 over age 16 feels stressed every day. And when we then look at the neurodivergent community, this then doubles up. And this is actually not to be trigger warning, but it can be quite really extreme. We already know that it causes issues like anxiety, depression, and unfortunately, suicidal ideation. And we see those rates in our community more. So it's one of those things that it's not something that I can say, you know, it's important and nice to do. It's important because it's also life-saving. And it's really important that we kind of reframe our thinking and narrative to make it a priority, because we want everyone to thrive. We want everyone to be able to live and exist in the world that we live in. And unfortunately, when the world isn't built for you, those barriers become just too much to handle. And that's why it's so important. That's why it's important that we're having this dialogue today, so we can kind of start educating all ourselves on what we can do practically, professionally, in our working lives, but also socially, because actually every one of us will probably have met a neurodivergent person if they're not one themselves, even if they don't know. So it's really, really critical that we start to understand these things to kind of help in that mental health epidemic that we're seeing as a result of some of this lack of support.
I think you're never going to bring out the best in any woman unless you provide a supportive environment for her to work in. Masking is exhausting. Trying to double guess what you're meaning is exhausting. Trying to fight with ambiguity is exhausting. Everybody has the right to be happy in their workplace. It might be a bit unrealistic, but we all have that right. But it's not just about the bosses understanding neurodiversity. It's about your peers, people that you share a space with, also understanding and respecting that. You don't want to be bullied into coming to lunch on a Friday continually and being tagged and labelled because you don't go. It should be okay that you just say, actually, no, thanks, it's not for me. So providing a good, safe and supported environment means that you're going to get the best out of any neurodiverse person, which means you're going to get extra.
And how does supporting neurodivergent women impact company success?
It's around improving belonging and culture. And I think if you're willing to put the time and effort into investing in your people, then they're going to stay. And it costs so much money to hire and recover those costs. And if you are hiring, then you want to be getting the widest pool that you can be hiring from. So you want to have those inclusive practices in place so that you can get the most amount of people onboarded and potentially wanting to come and work for your company. And they can get so much more of a diverse thinking pool and actually products that work really well across the board. So it's kind of, you do get so much more. It's kind of moving from that these people are costly to we want to invest in neurodivergent individuals and get that return on investment. There you go.
So neurodiverse women are an asset to any organization. And by investing in them, you are actually building up an asset. And by supporting them, you are encouraging them to work better. But that's going to give you huge returns within the company itself.
I think also adding to that, it's very interesting that lots of research has found that neurodivergent teams are up to 30% more productive when they receive the right support. And that's not to say that any, neurotype is more superior, but it also proves that if you receive the right support in the workplace or wherever you are, then you really thrive and you can actually excel at whatever it is you're doing. So how can companies actually create this inclusive and supportive work environment for neurodivergent women?
So practically, I think one of the things that all employees could be doing right now, first of all, is seek coaching so then they themselves can understand what their strengths are, what accommodations they need, because it is still your career, your life. So the more you understand yourself, that self-awareness, that's one piece. But for the employer here, you have a huge responsibility. But doing this work doesn't just benefit the 1 in 5 neurodivergent staff. I think this does more than that, because if we make a culture of inclusion, a culture where it uses people's strengths, a culture where we remove the barriers to access, we can just thrive and increase that productivity. And I can see that with the rise of AI tools like Otter. So let's say you're in a meeting and you can't kind of make notes and pay attention because maybe you've got ADHD, or maybe you're dyslexic like me as well. Maybe you've got all the combination. These tools can actually start bridging the gap. So if all employers made all these tools accessible, that's just one way of also bridging the gap and removing those barriers. But it doesn't just benefit neurodivergent staff, it benefits everyone. And remember, there'll be lots of neurodivergent people who don't know they're neurodivergent. So by actually putting in some of these things, you're making it better for all of your working populace. And there's just one other thing I'll suggest that I think is so important, and I've seen it trialled in my workplace, teams I've led. It's an employee passport, or I like to call it a user manual for each person that you lead. And this is for people managers. Now, what does this look like, this employee passport, or my favourite term for it, user manual? It says what the person's strength is, how they like to work, how they like to communicate, even things like pseudoscience like their Myers-Briggs, etc. It gives you a bit of information about how to optimise that person at work. Maybe that person doesn't like to work in a crowded office, and maybe they have an adjustment about working from home. You document all these things and you negotiate this so that it meets the needs of the business and the needs of the individual. And those user manuals can be passed on when you move teams and you move in your career, but it provides that useful tool for having these conversations. So I'm such a big advocate of that.
I think that training and knowledge is essential for the business or the employees, but I also think that there is a small bit of responsibility for the neurodivergent women. So we shouldn't have to be forced into a situation where we have to tell people, we have to divulge personal stuff about us. However, ideally, there would be a culture whereby you can go in and say, actually, that sort of stuff makes me really uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. And that could be going into board meetings or whatever it is. So it shouldn't be a drip down from the management. It should be an inclusive culture from everybody. And it should be okay to say, actually, I'm not okay doing that. But the onus should not be on the woman to have to keep reiterating something. It should be much more inclusive than that. But then there is that little bit that says, actually, you have to tell people if you want to make them to make allowances for you, you have to be a little bit more open and tell them.
I think we have to consider that this is also bigger than workplace. So the impact can go further than the 9 to 5, because we all take our work home and our home to work. So you have to consider if you're doing evening events, the impact to that, even if you're just going for drinks after work, the knock-on effect to that, or just even being in work, can be massive. And for me, going into offices and things like that, if I've have to travel quite far, it becomes quite overwhelming. And then the next day, you feel wiped out, right? So you have to have that bit of kind of compassion and flexibility so that you can flex things, not just on a specific every day you work from 6 till 5 or whatever. That's a very long day, 6 till 3. You need to be compassionate and flexible, wider than that. I think we have to think more than just noise cancelling headphones. The amount of times I just see people throwing noise cancelling headphones and go, off you go. You need to think about the whole employee cycle. So again, reasonable adjustments, often we're thought about the day in the life of, but the kind of employee experience is so much bigger than that. Your end of year reviews, your events that you go to, how you onboard people, how people leave the company, all of these things are really important and have massive touch points that need to be considered for kind of neurodivergent minds. And the other thing I would say is don't rely on your communities. If you do have an ERG or a neurodiversity community within your workplace, it's kind of unfair to ask them to solve the problem that they didn't put in place in the first place. So getting externals in or people in that will help and support you on that is a great way to kind of overcome some of that with that employee resource group in place as well. But asking them to solve the problem when they're probably already overworked and wanting to do everything on top is a massive challenge. So yeah, I think there is loads that can be done. There are quick, simple wins for everyone in regards of communication, like I said. But yeah, there's a lot.
I just want to touch on what Lucy has just said, noise cancelling ear defenders. I know that's one aspect of it, but sensory integration processing for anybody who has neurodiversity, it's a major factor. It plays a huge role in their everyday lives. Anybody who is neurotypical, we are able to block out so many noises, we are able to cope with different lights and so on. But somebody who is neurodiverse, for them, dealing with everyday life is a huge challenge as it is. So workplaces could really take that into consideration, what kind of sensory integration processing this specific neurodiverse woman or person needs, and then work accordingly. If, and it could be different on different days. So on a specific day, a neurodiverse person might be very sensitive to sound, but on other days, they may not be. So it's really, really good to check in with them what kind of sensory overload, or if they're undersensitive to some kind of sensory integration processing as well, and then work with that.
Amazing, thank you so much. I completely agree with you on the sensory aspect side of things. Research finds that autistic people take in up to an average of 30% more sensory input. So, I mean, imagine if now suddenly you could hear, all this music in the background, all the electricity buzzing, even us, our panel, before everyone came back inside, we all decided to sit down and try out different seats to see what was kind of most sensory friendly in terms of the lighting. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. Hopefully from especially the last question, there's a few things that you can take away to think about how you can integrate in your organisation or speak with your team or your line managers. Things like the reasonable adjustment passports or user manuals, as I mentioned, is a great idea. Making sure that everyone within the organisation understands neurodiversity, that it's not just on the individual themselves to self-advocate, but also on others to create an inclusive space. Creating sensory accommodations, making sure that lighting and sound and noise is accessible, and making sure that you kind of consult with third-party organisations, people who are lived experts, so that they provide, an impactful and engaging service like training or consulting, and that's not just on internal teams. Thank you everyone so much for your contributions, and it was lovely having you on the panel.
Thank you.